Hi guys, happy Sunday. How's everyone doing? I am just getting my sheet of paper ready. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick moment to say hello, hi, tell me how your Sundays are going, or your Sunday is going rather. And I'm just going to add my petals brush to the list of things or to my roster of brushes for today. While I am just getting my sheet ready, I'm using my Legion 9 by 12 hot press paper, so I'm just gonna slice this open. But this is what we are going to be painting today, and I want you guys to remember, please ask me questions as we're going along. If I'm going too fast, if you are not getting a certain technique and you want to wait for after the session is done and then just send me a private message. For some reason on Patreon, I feel like my messages do not, I don't get notified of your messages if you send it to me. So if it's not too much trouble at all, in addition to sending it on Patreon, feel free to send it to me on Instagram or via email. You'll have my email, or even on Facebook, although Facebook is a little bit sketchy sometimes as well. But yeah, do just reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to me is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so I have just sliced away our last sheet from my book here, and we are going to be tackling, like I mentioned, these roses right here. Um, these roses are a combination of like a pale background pink, and then the details within them are done in a metallic pink. So I don't know if you can actually see that or not, but that's what they are. And then for the filler florals that we have around, they are also in a metallic shade. I'm not sure if I'm going to be picking this bright shade, but if anyone's interested in these, like this specific palette, that was a part of the KMS watercolors from last year. I'm going to keep this mint. It's called mint to be handy on the side, just in case I decide I want to do this. However, the reason I don't want to take too much of the mint is because this is more along the line, the palette that I would prefer to use for today. So we've got a little bit of yellow happening, and then a bunch of different kinds of pinks and such like that. Yes, and I love the sage green that we have happening there, so that's definitely going to be a part of it as well. And yeah, okay, so let me talk about the supplies really quickly. Um, no one's said hi yet. That's okay. Whenever you have questions, you want to tune into the conversation, feel free to write in the chat. So I'm going to keep these aside. There we go. So what we're going to be using for our supplies, I've got 3 brushes here. We've got the Princeton number 4 round. I've got the petals number 6, and then I've got the Princeton Aqua Elite number 6 from my travel set. And the reason I'm getting these fine tipped brushes is because this is what enables us to get these kind of really controlled yet loose strokes for our roses. And then we're able to get these nice, beautiful little fine lines with the leaves and such. Notice how the leaves have like a nice fine point tip at the edge, and then you get a nice little swirl. So it's all about your strokes and how you kind of maneuver your brushes. So I'm not going for the thick brushes here because I want my roses to be controlled. And then I'm just going in once it's sort of damp as opposed to wet. We're going in with the metallics and we're adding that in so we get a nice soft bloom into the pink that we already have laid down. So that's how we're building up on our layering. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, so brushes, and I explained to you why, and then I'm using my Legion Stonehenge hot press, as I mentioned, and I'm going to try and concentrate most of the stuff in the middle here so that we can get more out of this. Hi Sylvia, happy Sunday. Okay, so let's begin. Let me tell you about the colors I'm using. Feel free to get a couple of different pinks that you might want to use, because that's how I've achieved like this sort of pinky look, but it's all different pinks that I've thrown in here. Same thing over here. If you want to use just the one, that's fine too. But here's what I'm using. I'm using the alizarin crimson. I also have permanent rose, and then quinacridone magenta. So these are my three pinks. And then for the yellow, I have a yellow ochre, and we're just going to do that to kind of add a nice little yellowish sort of blend on the outskirts of the rose. And then for greens, I'm using olive green, one of my favorites. And then I have sage. So the sage looks like this. It's like a lighter military green, I would describe it as. And then the olive green looks like this, like a nice fresh green against the pink. Okay, so just to give you an idea in case you're using other colors. And then for my metallic pink, I'm using Christmas Cape. I think that's what it's called. Again, by KMS. And mint to be, I'm not sure if I'm going to be using this yet, so we'll go with the flow and see. Okay, Sylvia, feel free to ask any questions. I don't know who else is here, but Sylvia, definitely ask me questions, and I will pop my head up every now and then if you need a little bit of help. Okay, so let's begin. So I'm going to start off with using the number 6. So we'll use the number 6 to get down our nice loose strokes, like our base light shade of pink. And then we'll use the number 4 to go in with a darker tone and just kind of highlight and get those nice little dark areas within our rose, so it pops up in a loose sort of manner. And you want that blend, so you need to make sure that things are damp. Okay, I need a palette, which seems like I don't have one. Give me 1 second. For someone who has a ton of palettes all the time, suddenly I find myself having none around me. That's so weird. Okay. I am just going to use one of these. Okay. These are actually for my events that I typically do. So let's, I've got water handy on the side, and I'm going to start off with doing one of the pinks. So let's start mixing a little bit of the pink. I'll start with the quinacridone magenta. Actually, no. You can see how deep that hole is, so I constantly gravitate to that color. So instead, I'm going to challenge myself and go with the alizarin crimson first. And here's the consistency I need. For those of you who follow Daler-Rowney as well, I think she broke down consistencies really, really well. I think it was like cream, milk, and tea. So we want tea, and by tea I mean there's more water, less color. So we get a nice, beautiful, light wash of the pink. If you're unsure how light things are, it always helps to have a rough sheet of paper on the side that you can just sort of swatch, and that's nice. So we want that nice little swatch like this, and then just to sort of show you what I'm looking for those details in the rose, or loose details, then you take your number 4 and then you just dip right away into your cake, your little cupcake, color cake. And then you get that nice solid color directly from there. And when you drop it into your pinks, you see that gorgeous bloom that it does. We don't want to bloom on that level. However, if you wait for this to dry just a little bit and then go in to certain areas, you get a slightly more controlled bloom. So kind of figuring out when to go in with that darker color is also something that you'll probably pick up on as we go along with this lesson. So hopefully that made some sense. So here we go. I'm going to start off with the number 6, like I mentioned. Nice little bloom of color here. Okay, so this should be good enough, I think. We can get more. I'm going to be fluctuating between other pinks. So here we go. Using the fine tip of my brush, I'm going to start off with just doing little C strokes or comma strokes. So you want to do one, and then that's super tiny. Then you want to do another one, almost like a hook at the top of it. And as we're building up on our strokes, so I'm going to do another one here, you're pressing down your brush a little bit more to get a thicker stroke. And then I'm going to do a one at the top like this. You see how thick they are in comparison to the little center ones. Dipping my brush in water, I'm going to build on, I'm going to put this aside so you can see what the roses look like. We're building on the little strokes around it. So really pressing down on your brush, making sure you've got white space in between, making sure that our color is nice and light. And then as we're building on the strokes, we're kind of just lightly guiding the shape of the rose. But you want most of your roses to sort of look like it's facing upward. So you always kind of add more strokes at the bottom so it looks fuller, and then there's less at the top, or the strokes at the top are a lot thinner, kind of like that. Okay, so again, we're building from light to dark, and then loose strokes just like this, making sure you've got ample enough white space in between. And now that we've had time to build up on the rest of the rose, you're going to find that the center of the rose has dried up just a tad bit. So this is where we go in with the dark color using the number 4. And you're making sure you don't have too much color on here. So this is where a paper towel comes in handy. You can just dab ever so lightly to make sure there's not blobs of color. And then we want to go into the very center, get that nice little dark center happening there. So lightly just doing this. And watch the bloom. And that's perfect. Like, it gives us that nice sort of romantic look and feel. However, this is a little bit too dark for me, so I'm going to just sort of build up a little bit more here and there and push the color around. And I'll let this dry for a bit, because you want to make sure that when it's so dark that you can absolutely push the color around to get things to look a little bit more gradual as opposed to dramatic, where it's just smack dab bright in the middle and then the rest of it is light. You want that cohesive look to happen to your roses. So this is where you can slightly move the color around while it is damp. So we'll leave this for now. Let's do another rose. Oh, volume. Volume is down, is it? How about now, Sylvia? Is it better? Let me know. Because I'm speaking right into the speaker here. I'm going to wait for you to let me know before I continue. Because I think it may have something to do with the volume on my laptop, which is low. Okay. But was there any difference at all? Because I turned up the volume on my laptop, so I think that's what controls how you hear me. So while we're waiting, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll do one more rose. So the more you do this, the easier it'll get. Like with anything really. So here's another way. So if you want to do less, oh, not really. Oh, I wonder why. Oh, that sucks. Okay, well, I'll try and figure out something a little bit later if this is an issue. Okay, here we go. So using the same technique that I just told you, except this time what we're going to do is we're gonna make it easier on ourselves and try and do less strokes. So you can see how these guys are, the background pink is kind of like more blobby with less white space in the center. So we're gonna go extremely loose. Let me get another pink this time. So I'll take the second pink that I have here. This is the Permanent Rose. Mixing that in here. I want nice and light. So we get some nice loosey blooms. And same thing, so same idea. And this time I'll do this rose facing this way. So again, bottom half of the rose needs to have thicker strokes or more layering and less at the top. So this way it gives you that impression that it's facing in a certain direction. So here we go. Tiny little C stroke, another one at the top. They don't have to be perfect, so it's okay if it kind of looks a little bit off the whole hook idea that I mentioned. And just build up on your strokes as you go along. You get a little bit more color so it stands out a bit more. Drop that in. I've got tons of water on my brush, so it's really nice and watery. Notice the white spaces. And then for the bottom petals, what I'm going to do is try and give it more of a frilly look. And by frilly, I mean kind of like, you see how this looks like a nice little frill all around, kind of like that. So you can always cheat by kind of controlling how these strokes look. And by cheat, I mean you're kind of deliberately doing those strokes to get those nice little frills, okay? So we've got that. Now we're going to get a little bit of the darker tone. And this time I'm going to lightly, you can see how there's a pool of color in here. Sometimes when you dip, even when you dip the tip, too much color comes on here. And I think that's what happened over here. So I'm going to get just the color on the tip of this brush. So I'm lightly dabbing across to make sure any excess color goes back into this color cake, okay? Now another thing to note is when you're painting these, if you've got pooling of water, where if you kind of put your head off to the side facing the light and you see there's pools of water, you drop this color in at this time, it'll kind of just sit there. So you have to make sure that it's damp just enough for the color to sort of give you a bloom. So keep these things in mind. So here we go. I'm kind of just going over the center first, the tiny little curves, and then I'm only going to add these strokes at the bottom here so that it gives me that impression that the rose is facing this way and the shadows are down. And notice how I'm kind of just flicking my hand to get those strokes in. Just like that. So you can see the difference in the bloom. I know it's not completely dried up yet, but this one was darker and it kind of just bloomed all over. And this one gives you a little bit more spacing around. So the more you do, the more comfortable you'll get and you'll find your roses getting better. You'll find yourself understanding the whole dropping darker color in, when to sort of layer, what kind of blooms you're anticipating. And this is where it's really helpful, not just for roses, but any kind of flowers that you do. So let's move on and do one more. This time I'm going to get the second color, which is the quinacridone magenta. Oh, actually, before I do that, we've not been getting any of the yellow ochre. So I'm getting some of the yellow ochre, very light version of it, so more like tea. I'm going to drop that in. Might be a little bit too late to drop that in here, but some of these areas were still a little bit damp, so I'm just dropping some yellow in here. Let's do it for the third one. It will be a better effect. So this way I have it in the back of my mind and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So here we go. Quin magenta, and do a small rose over here facing this way. So same two little curves, pressing down to sort of get thicker strokes. Getting color, dipping the tip of my brush in water so I get a light tone, because I want it to be darkest in the center and light as we gradually go outward. So that's why I keep getting some color, dipping my brush in water. That's what guarantees that I'm going lighter in tone. And loose strokes. So just kind of flicking your wrist. The more you try and control your strokes, the more controlled they look. So if you want loose, you kind of have to just practice just flicking your hand and kind of allowing the stroke to be more organic as opposed to controlled, because you're trying to make it look a certain way. So now is when I'm going to get some of the yellow. So here we go, getting some of the yellow ochre, not quinacridone. Yellow ochre, and I'm dropping this in. You can even sort of do a couple of strokes with the yellow at the very end. And this way it'll just seep from the pink into the yellow ochre, giving you a nice sort of yellow blend. So getting the number 4 again. This is fairly dried up. Let's get some of that quin. And then using just the tip of my brush, I'm lightly sort of grazing to get these strokes in. Sometimes you might think you want to go over it one more time just to get a proper lay of color, and that's totally fine. You can see how when you kind of start thick in the center and then go very light as you go outward, kind of gives you a nice perspective on the rose. I'm dropping in some color here at the bottom too. Like, just have fun with this and play around with it, because this is how you learn. When you get too stiff and you're like, I'm not getting the results, or I'm trying to make it look a certain way, and you're not going with the flow, you kind of tense up and your strokes are less loose. So that is my best advice for just loosening up and kind of going with the flow. Okay, let's do a couple more and quicker this time, and let's just see the results we get. So I've done 3. So these are my 3 here. If you want to distance a little bit and get some more happening here, that's also fine. I'll allow you more creative freedom in this area, so you can disperse your roses wherever you want to. And again, if any questions at all, just let me know as we are going along. So this time I'm going to revert back to that first pink that I had. Now this is way too dark, so I'm just going to get more water and kind of tone that down here. And let's start. I'm going to start mine over here on this side. So light little hook strokes, and then really pressing down, getting water on my brush to kind of lighten the color, getting more color, and then really going around. So this time this rose is facing that way. And I'm just going thicker on the outer strokes, more white space in between. White space, I cannot emphasize how important white space is when you're trying to do loose flowers. So build up nicely, and then going in with a little bit of the color directly from the color cake, and then dropping that into the center. And then it's giving you that nice dark to light effect that we all want. And then I'm getting some of the yellow, and here I am just going to add some yellow strokes, underlying yellow strokes right here into these strokes. They're nice and damp. Actually, they're not damp, they're wet, because I can see there's a little bit of puddling happening with the water. But sometimes when it's a puddle and you drop some color in, you can get some really nice effects once it's dried up. So again, don't shy away from things. And if you don't like how things are turning out, like I've always mentioned, sit with it for a while. Don't just immediately trash it, because sometimes you need a break. You come back and you see it with a fresh pair of eyes and it looks entirely different. So take it slow and go with the flow. Okay, so I'm going to do a few more small, tinier roses, so it looks like these happening here. These little tiny roses kind of just peeking out, and then we can go with our next set. So for the tinier roses, I'm going to stick with the number 4 and keep it small. So this, let's go with the pink. Permanent Rose, I believe this is. And watering it down. Yes, the more you do, the better you get, Sylvia. Don't worry about the direction for now. If you're having a problem, just focus on getting the bleeds first. How are your bleeds looking? And how's your white space? Is that catching on? How are your strokes? One thing at a time, and then once you tackle, for instance, the bleeding or the layering, and then you're good with that, you can do it in your sleep. Actually, no, not even in your sleep. You can just do a basic bleed. Then you can progress onto tackling the whole direction. And I can give you some pointers on that after as well. So don't worry too much about direction. If you can just keep them looking straight up too, that's fine for now. Less is more, right? Okay, so I'm going to do tiny ones over here. So I like to sort of start my leaves or additional flowers where there's areas of dampness, so then it gets a nice bleed into that flower. If you're able to achieve that, great. If you're not, because you're still learning and spending time on other things and it's dried up, that's okay. So I'll start one a little bit outward here, and I'm just going to keep the strokes small, tight, and end it like that. So as I'm ending things off, I'm getting more water on my brush, and I'm just kind of lightly fluffing that around the rose so it looks very loose and dark to light, right? Getting some darker tones on the tip of my brush. What did we use? We used the Permanent Rose. So just a light bit on there, and I'm just lightly adding these little C strokes within our petals. And we're good for this, okay? So I'm going to use the same color that I have. What I've done is dipped my brush in water, And I'm going to go ahead and create another rose over here. Actually, let's do one kind of facing down here, just like a small one. I'm going to wash off my brush, get some of that yellow, because now these two will touch. Sometimes what can happen is if you've got water happening and the colors are very similar, it kind of blends in and looks like a blob. So this is where adding a slightly different tone where they connect can be helpful. And kind of separating the two almost, just like that. So washing off, because now we got to do a little bit of our center. And I'm just adding that, oops. That's why paper towel is like your best friend, because if you feel like too much water is on your brush and you go back in where you've just added color, it can spread into it and kind of make it lighter than you intended. So getting some color directly in the color, on the tip of my brush. I'm just adding little tiny strokes for our center. Okay, Sylvia. The last one I just did is much better. The first three having a problem with the bleed in the center, it becomes a blob of water in one. Okay, so here's what I think is happening there. I'm going to pause this just a bit. Let me get this sheet of paper here. So I think what's happening is, Sylvia, maybe you've got a lot of water, and this is what I mean by a lot of water. So I'm going to give you an example and you can let me know if I'm correct or not correct. So you've got, let's just say you're painting your flower. And you've got so much water in the center, you don't allow it to dry, and then you immediately go and get some color which has water in it, or is, I guess, maybe more of a milk consistency than a cream, and then you add it in there, and then you're building up on your strokes, and before you know it, it kind of takes over the whole thing. Is that what's happening? And the blob can also happen when you don't leave white space in your rose. So for instance, if I just sort of kept going over this and creating more strokes, this is what's going to happen. I'm losing that color detail and I'm also losing the white space. Okay, so keeping what I just said in mind, make sure you don't have too much water on your brush when you're going in to highlight your centers or add your shadows to your centers. Because if you've got too much water on your brush and then your first layer already is kind of swimming on your page because it's still very, very damp, make sure your brush is literally like all color, less water. And try that. Things like this you'll pick up through trial and error. And once you pick up on this, you'll automatically be keeping these things in mind as you're painting anything really in watercolor. It's just a good thing to keep in mind. And then try and be more mindful of your white space. I cannot stress that enough. White space is your friend. Okay, so let's do a couple more and let me know how it's going for you, Sylvia, as you're continuing as well. Let me get some of the purpley hue, which is the quinacridone magenta. So we've got 4 big roses. I'm going to do a tiny one. I want to do a tiny one here. And this one can be more like a really light blob. And what happens is when you add loose little blobs like this, is it just gives more of a hierarchy to your whole painting. Like these flowers will stand out more because their details are more honed in and more deliberate, while these are just very loose little dabs of color, also making these ones stand out, right? So keep that in mind, and as you progress, and when you look at your end results, you'll notice these things that I'm highlighting in my commentary here. I'm going to get more of that color. I'm going to do a couple of small little roses here. And again, I'm using my number 4. Now I know already that the amount of water I'm using for these roses is a lot. So I need to make sure there's a little bit of a blob of water in the center. So if I go in and add my dark color right now, it's not going to gel well. So I can either wait for this to dry just a bit, or learn for myself if I'm right or wrong by going in. So I'm going to get some color directly from here. And I think I've moved some of the color around, so I think I'm safe. So using the tip, I'm going to lightly, need more color, lightly add these tiny little strokes in here. Not bad. So the more you allow things to dry, the lighter it'll get, and it'll bloom more, bloom and bleed more. So you can notice this in our dried up roses here. Okay, so continuing on, let's get a couple more before we can add some of the metallics on here. So I'm just going to add very loosey small ones here. I'm dropping in some of that, I believe it's the permanent rose now. Again, I'm fluctuating between the pinks because I want them to sort of have different values. And doing little dots of color, kind of like keeping it loose like this here, also helps. I'm going to drop some of that pink in the permanent rose in here, just to sort of give it a nice little blend. Okay. I didn't add any of the yellow anywhere, so if you want to add some yellow, that's a lot, because I had a lot of yellow in my brush. I'm just going to take my paper towel and lightly dab off. I'll do one more big rose before we can progress on, because I like to have either three main flowers or 5 main flowers, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So one more, and then I think we should be good. So I'll do this one up here. So one last time that you get to see me do a rose in a larger scale. So tiny little C strokes. You can see it's very, very watered down. And then as I'm progressing to make the outer strokes, I start with the tip, press down, and trail off or swipe off the page. And I'm leaving white space in between. And then as I'm building up on my 3rd layer, I'm really pressing down on my brush, taking off. So I should use my number 6. Same thing here. Feel free to like really press down on your brush like this, and then trail off. And I'm going to get a little bit of that yellow and really add that. And I'm not fully washing off my brush as I get the yellow. I'm just adding it into the pink, mixing the pink in with it. And you get your nice little loose rose. Notice how my little 2 tiny strokes were there, and I've built up so much at the bottom. And then finally, I know this one right here is a blob. So I'm going to wait for this to dry, or just you can just wipe off or swipe off some of the excess water. Your brush just absorbs it all. And that also works. And then you can go in. So getting some of the, at this point, I'm kind of mixing the colors in between one another too. So you can see right here, it's immediately blooming in and it's not as dark. And that's mainly because I've got more of a tea consistency as opposed to the getting the color only from the color cake. So again, I'm going back in, dabbing to get it just on the tip, and then lightly adding these strokes in here. Again, these are things, no matter how much I explain it to you, if you're not doing this with me, you are not going to know what I'm talking about. This kind of stuff comes from experience of actually trying it out and then having your aha moment after you've tried it. So you can see the gradual variation and how things have sort of evolved. I'm just going to add a couple of like really light strokes at the top of this rose here. And these little blobs or dots or whatever you want to call them really enhance the whole loose feeling of the roses. Okay, so one more thing before we go on to the metallics is I like to do a little bit of splatter. So now is the best time. So if you want to do a splatter with different variations of the pink that we've mixed, and all I'm doing is loading my brush with the light pink and then taking a second brush and just lightly targeting certain areas. And what happens is when you do this, you're able to sort of give that feel that there's little buds happening around on a loose scale. If you want bigger splatter, then you just need to make sure you get more water on your brush, or a bigger brush for that matter. And then you can also control the darkness of your splatter. So you can just get more color, less water, that sort of thing. The harder you hit, the bigger the strokes too. So, okay. Sylvia, I know you wrote a comment, but really quickly, I want to do this one thing because this shouldn't dry. So another thing that is also important when you're doing loose and you want to kind of show that nice feathering happening around, or what I call fluffing, is while this is damp, make sure you wash off most of the water and color from your brush. You can pick certain bits here and there and kind of just smudge it around. And what this does is it gives that illusion that there's more background flowers. And you can even attach it with a stem and such. So for instance, if you want to make this smudge slightly bigger, like a blob, but with a little bit of white space. Another one over here. I'm kind of just sort of using these little splatters as a way to spread them around and make it seem like little pink flowers or buds. So again, you don't have to do it for all of them, just a couple. And these are just tips and tricks that I'm sharing that'll enhance any of your compositions that you do, really. Okay, so that's that. Let me just read your comment really quickly. I was using Princeton Velvetouch long round and I see it's too long, so I switched my brush for now. Is there just a round type and not long round? Yes, there is just So the Princeton carries those Velvetouch brushes in long round and then also the regular. So if you noticed, I don't know if you got the pack, but for instance, this came in the pack. So I got the long round in the number 8. I think it was the long round. Don't quote me. I don't have that on me here, but I'm pretty sure it was the long round that was part of the pack. And then we just have the regular round in the number 4 in the pack. So yeah, feel free to try another brush if you have something that is not long, I guess. If you are using the long round brush, you're gonna find that your roses just are bigger, and that's okay. Just make accommodations for it when you're planning your composition, and then obviously the size of paper that you're using. Okay, so let's use a little bit of next thing. Let's do some of the plain little basic 5-petal flowers. I'm not going to go as intense as the exclusive video that I just posted for you guys, like the first video for this month with the blue little flowers. But feel free to spend time and really do those if that's what you want to. I'm just going to keep it very basic and loose and do the regular 5-petal. So let's use, I will use the mint to be, and the number 4. So let's get some of this happening over here. If you don't have metallics, that's okay. Use another color of your choice. Like a dark purple is always nice. Actually, a dark purple might be really nice against this. Just make things pop really nicely. I'm going to use a little bit of this because I have this out. So let's start off with some happening. I'll do some here at the bottom. So for my 5-petal flowers, I'm just using the tip of my brush, pressing down, trailing off. That's 1 petal. Dip the tip of my brush in water, get another one just like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now another way you can do these 5-petal flowers is you can do little dabs or dots. So do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a circle. And then, starting from the dot, take it out and paint your little petals. Again, we're not looking for perfection in terms of even sized petals or even closed petals. As long as there's white space or some white space, you're guiding the viewer's eye to kind of tell it that here's some flowers. And those are the petals around it. So leaving some to the viewer's imagination is always helpful, and what makes loose style of painting so interesting to look at. So you can absolutely also add a couple of strokes in between to kind of indicate that there's more flowers happening. Again, when you're doing this, it's kind of tricky because we're using one color, but if you've got enough white space happening, and if you go slightly darker with some areas, you're able to get that nice contrast. So then again, you're able, like the viewer is able to tell that these are loose flowers happening there. So I'm just getting some water on the brush without really washing it and adding a couple of dabs of color. So that's the idea, okay? So we'll do a little bit of that in here and then just a tad bit at the top as well. Again, 3 spots is where I like to have it, and maybe diagonal or zigzag in my composition. So here we go, same idea. Feel free to do the 5 dots and then build up on it if that's easier for you. you just want, like, it's literally like having blobs of color in these areas to kind of visually pique the viewer's interest. And then I like to kind of have some offsetting kind of off into the white space, because then it gives it that gradual concentrated to fading off into the white effect. I'll do a little bit over on this side here, right here. I didn't expect this lesson to be this long, but sometimes when you just start something, you find it hard to stop, and I think today is one of those days. So sorry if anyone needs to leave early. You can always catch the replay and finish it off. But I'm gonna continue on and keep on doing the leaves and stuff, so you guys have that to work on. So I think that's good enough. So let's now get some of the green and connect and add some of the leaves. The leaves that we're going to do are, the strokes are going to be very, very similar to the petals that we've done. Actually, before we do that, hold up. We've got to get a little bit of the pink in our roses. So I'm going to use this pink. If you've got something slightly darker than the bottom shade you've used for your roses, that can also work. So all I'm doing is getting a nice potent consistency. So it could be like a milky consistency or a cream. I think more of a cream, yeah. And then using the tip of my brush, we're going to do exactly like what we did in the centers of this. And then I'm pressing down just on the inner bits of this. Pops up, right? And the camera doesn't do it justice, but when you watch how the color integrates, like the metallic integrates with the bottom color, it's very pleasing to the eye. Now I know all my roses are not the same color, and I'm using the one pink for this. That's okay. I'm gonna go with the flow and see what happens. And we're only concentrating mainly in the center. And if you want to have some, I'll show you that in a bit. Give me 1 second. Just kind of adding little dabs of sparkle and shimmer to your roses. So what I'm saying is, if you want to add a little bit of a watered down version of the shimmer on the outskirts of your roses, you can sort of go, for instance, let's use this one. Just kind of lightly adding it on the outskirts to tie it in with the rest of it. Or if you're pleased with the shapes, don't bother. I'm just adding a couple here and there. This one seems a little bit too dark. But if something like that happens where you're thinking, I don't really like how that looks, don't worry, because we can always go with placement of leaves and kind of add some leafy detail over there. So this is how you can compensate for things that maybe you didn't expect or want to look that way. Don't overdo your centers because then it'll become a blob. When you overdo your centers, you lose white space, and then that's when blobs come about. Okay, it's good enough. I'm not even going to tackle the tiny ones. I'll leave them for now, and let's go to our greens. So I really love this sage green, so we'll start off with the sage green because it's muted and dull in comparison to our nice bright flowers that we have happening here. So try and move as much things out of place as possible. And I'm getting the color directly from here. I'm not even going to bother mixing it onto my palette. I'm just getting it directly from here. And so if you're new and you have not done this before, and I have a couple of videos on here where I talk about brush control, where you're able to use your number 4 or any brush that has a nice fine pointed tip to give you nice lines, thin lines like this. The petals is also great for something like this because it's got a nice fine pointed tip. And I've done a couple of videos with the petals brush showing you how to get some nice fine pointed tips. This is what the petals brush looks like. It is super fine at the tip, and then you're able to really press down and get some nice big leaves if you want to. Okay, so just a couple of options if you want to do that. So let's just, I'm going to use the number 4 because that's what I used for my little card there. And we're going to start off, I like to sort of start off with the leaves in between the flowers. So this way we get some break in between and we're able to see what's where. And we're not going leaf crazy here. So we're going to start off with doing small leaves and keeping them small. So all I'm doing is using the tip of my brush, pressing down, and then trailing off on the tip again. That's how I get these nice curvy little leaves, tiny leaves, okay? And I always like to do a nice little loose flick, a second one near it, and then a third thinner one next to it, and have like 3 little loose leaves, which kind of really adds some nice looseness to things. I'm seeing a round circle on my screen. Are you guys still able to see, or? Oh, okay. Okay, good. Oh, that's weird because I'm seeing an error occurred. Please try again later. You're still able to see, Sylvia? I mean, I can see it on I can see it on my camera, but for some reason on my laptop I'm seeing error occurred. Oh, this is so bizarre. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm gonna continue. All right, so we're gonna continue with the leaves, and like I mentioned, in between the flowers, so then you have some idea of what's where. So let's do that. So here's in between. So you can also do a nice little line, and then starting from the top of the line, press down and trail to the bottom of the line. This way it kind of helps you figuring out where or what direction your leaves are going in. You can also create little stems and have tinier or leaves protruding from there. something cute like that. I'll do some in between here. So you can see the shapes are very organic. It's the idea that we're using a green is what lets people know that, hey, those are leaves. You can have some overlapping on some of our little splatters as well to kind of really give it that nice loosey feel. Let's get a little bit happening on the outskirts of this one. Now, what I like to mention, and if you've watched a couple of my videos, I mention this quite a bit. If you're trying to make the leaf look like it's coming from behind the flower, you can start off by doing that curve to the petal and then pushing that color outward and then closing it up to kind of look like a leaf. It's a very concentrated effort, obviously, but just something if you want to kind of switch your leaves up to kind of give it that more natural look. I'm gonna get tiny, so for the tiny roses, if you can go tiny on your leaves, that's great. Make an effort. This is how you learn brush control, where you're controlling sizing and thins and thicks. Okay, so small little greens, amounts of green makes such a huge difference, as you can tell. And then what I like to do is doing a lot of these little lines and then having like tendril kind of effects coming out from them. But let's finish a couple of leaves first, and then we'll do the tendril style lines. Okay, so in between, here we go. Feel free to place where you feel you want to place your leaves, as opposed to just copying my placement. I'm just literally just going with the flow and doing what I think works best for my placement. Some can happen over here too. A couple over here by between the area. So if you have an area where there's small flowers touching a bigger flower, try and add little dabs of green. Really, really picks up and kind of pushes elements out. Tiny little lines for tiny leaves, or tiny little stems for tiny leaves, just to give it that nice little break in detail. Okay, so now that we've done this, let's go in with a little bit of the olive green and just add a couple of green leaves, because I always say do either mix and bloom two colors within your leaves, or you can have two different kinds of leaves that you have happening, because it just adds more to your painting, and you'll see that in a bit. So you can have them happening right in the areas where you have your first green, and sometimes they can bleed nicely depending on the dampness, and just blend in nicely. They'll just blend in nicely with the leaves. So I'm going to keep this simple, keep the same kind of leaves, just do it in a different color and use it sparingly. At this point, if you want to stand up to see what the aerial view of your painting looks like, this will help you better in figuring out where you want to add these little guys, because you don't want to add them all over, but at the same time you want to add them just enough so that they're evenly spread out. So here I did a little bit of a curve out there, have this leaf come out this way, another one here. And then I'm just kind of doing light little dabs or strokes up in the air to kind of make it seem like it's just phasing out. Mailing set works wonderfully for this lesson too. It has all the right shimmers and you can get varied shades. Absolutely, Sylvia. The mailing is such an amazing set of colors, and I would totally recommend that. I have the Daler-Rowney. I like to kind of switch things up for myself, so I am getting the best of all worlds. But yes, earlier in the year, for the first 6 months of this year, I dominantly used mailing. Okay, so so I'm going to use this color to attach stems to our floating flowers here. So using the tip of my brush, I'm going to, I like, instead of using straight lines, I like giving my stems a curve. So I'll start from here and kind of curve it outward like that, then do another curve up to the top flower, that sort of thing. You don't have to attach them all. You might want to leave some kind of just hanging in the air, and that's okay. But I'm going to attach a couple and then add some leaves to it. It kind of adds a nice flow to your painting, as opposed to having things just floating. So for leaves, again, I'm trying to be as tiny as possible, but at the same time, all these tiny little strokes that are filling up that area, so you can tell those are cute little clusters of flowers. And what you can do is go lighter in this area. So for instance, this is a perfect area where I'd like to do a little flop, or a tendril rather, kind of like this. You see how it's kind of just like curving outward, downward, like different directions, something like that. So I'm just going to start a stem from here, and then I'm taking it outward and kind of going down like this. That was not intentional, so I'm going to cover that up by adding a leaf on it, because I want it to be a nice little curve. Sometimes this happens. You don't get nice curves. So what do? You just cover it up with a leaf and try and extend and make more little loose details around it. You just have to roll with the punches. Sometimes you drop your brush on your sheet, and then you have to find a creative way to kind of cover that up, and that's okay. We all go through that. So I've done some there. I'm going to do some at the bottom here. And so starting from the rose, getting little bits of tiny little strokes in, and then for these, I'm going to have them protruding out to the little dots, so it looks like more movement happening, and then like throw one down this way. And then just adding little bits of green in between. And so fluffing is where I go dip your brush in water and start washing out all the green, and then just lightly add little tiny like strokes or dabs of color. And when it's lighter, again, it gives you that nice gradual dark to light kind of fading off into the white of your page effect. This can be a little bit of a learning curve because you're going to try to figure out when to stop. And I still go through this. Like there are times where I'm just like, okay, I need to stop, but I can't stop myself. So it's one of those things. But cute, right? Like you've got dark areas, you've got light areas. That's the whole idea. So we've got one more area for this. So let's add that over there. So I'm just using the tip of my brush to lightly get those nice thin lines. That's how you're getting thin lines, by using just the tip and lightly grazing on your sheet. And then I'll do a nice little line like that. And then dipping the tip of my brush in water, lightly grazing to get nice little smudges of green. Adding some green in between these flowers, because now we can get some separation and a little bit more definition within this little cluster. Now this little protrusion is nice, but I don't like that it's just hanging like that, so I'm going to extend this to be a little bit more curved inward and give it a tiny leaf at the end. Again, just a preference of mine. The more you do these little dabs, the more you'll get comfortable with figuring out the shape that you like for these kind of loose leaves. Lastly, I want to add a couple of leaves right next to the flower and the main flower and the tiny flowers. And again, this just gives more breakage in your composition, so people can tell where one ends and the other begins, and also giving that nice illusion of fullness and more foliage happening in the background. Same thing over here. If you want to go very light and add some dabbing, that'll be helpful. I'm just going to, before I go lighter, I just want to add some tiny little smudges of green here so that you can tell the difference between the two kinds of flowers happening. Kind of sporadically adding these around. Add a little bit here. Do you see how it's like making these areas pop? Huge difference. So tiny little details, just very subtle, but like really elevate how things look. Gonna get some over here, and then we can switch back to the lighter shade. For our final little bits of whatever we want to do. Adding some very tiny loose kind of strokes for our pink blobs that we smudged. I'm going to add some here because there's none on this little mini flower island, mini flower island right there. And let me just add a bit more here, and then we are done this bit. Okay, so now the little fluffing with the green, so let's do that. So getting a muted green. Make sure it's nice and muted. So very watered down. Because we don't want it to be overpowering, we just want it to lightly fluff around the area. Okay, so here's an area that can do some fluffing. You can also do a splatter if you have no patience and you just want to get it done. Because trust me, I get it. There's some times where I just want to be done. And I'm willing to take the risk of not knowing what's going to happen. And sometimes that's part of the thrill of painting, where you're not sure how it's going to land and you're willing to take that risk. I'm going to add bits of this in here. The fluffing part is where my impressionistic painting style shows up, because one of my favorite artists is Van Gogh, and he was definitely an impressionist, and I love the idea of having a whole bunch of colors sort of coming together to tell a story, and then it's up to the viewer to sort of read that story visually through color. So I love that fluffing. So you can see it immediately like gets full. You get that nice impression of fullness and background leaves. Okay, almost done. I'm going to add some more in here. Adding some to the bottom. Okay, and that's it. I'm not going to do anything else. Let me just take the camera a bit higher so you can see how this turned out. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Let me see if you can see some of the shimmer. Can you see the shimmer? Like, depending on where the light hits, you can see light or dark. So that's just one added cool effect that you can have on your florals. But yeah, it's like a cute little vine. So I hope this was fun. So let me know, for people who are watching after the fact and you're painting along and you come across any issues, just send me a message, preferably on Instagram, but or email, whatever works for you. And I'm happy to help because I'm here for you guys. So just let me know. And Sylvia, if you're here, I think you are, yes. Just let me know as well how you did. Did you have any questions at all? And I'd love to see your work. So guys, please either post it. I think you can post it on Patreon or post it in the Facebook group, which is not very active at this time. Like, the whole point of the Facebook group is there so you guys can engage with me and show me your work. So if you post there, that's great. If you want to email it to me, that's also great. But or tag me on Instagram. I'd love to see how you guys did. All right. So Sylvia, nothing from you yet. So I'm assuming everything went well. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Yeah, okay. That's it, guys. Thank you for watching. And yeah, we will tackle more soon enough. Bright stuff, kind of like what we did earlier on for the basic watercolor live on YouTube. And then I decided to do the lighter version, a little bit more controlled for patrons for this month. So try them both if you've missed this one. And yeah, this is the style. This is the style we're going to be exploring in the upcoming retreat. So I can't wait. No questions, but this was amazing and I feel like has elevated me to another level, especially with composition and form of roses. Oh, good. I'm thrilled to read this, Sylvia. I'm so glad. Like I said, try it again because you, as you already mentioned earlier on, you did the first couple and then it kind of loosened up and you get the concept. So the more you do, the easier it gets. So if you want to try it again and this time without watching me, go for it because you might just surprise yourself with the results. All right, and if not, you can always just do the replay because that also works. All right, so have a lovely, lovely Sunday, guys, and yeah, looking forward to seeing your work. We'll chat soon. Bye.